The salt-laced air, thick and cloying like cheap perfume, always found its way to me. It clung to the peeling paint of my rented room, seeped into the worn fabric of my coat, and settled deep in my lungs. Years of breathing this brackish breath hadn't cleansed me, not by a long shot. It just made me feel permanently damp, like a forgotten rag. My fingers traced the condensation on the grimy window pane, each smear a fleeting ghost of the city lights. They used to be beacons guiding me through the labyrinth. Now they just seemed to mock my stillness. The past clung to me, a shadow with sharp edges, its name whispered in hushed tones by those who remembered the mess I'd made. The case, always the case. A clatter from the street below jolted me. Not unusual in this part of town, the constant symphony of industry and decay. But this sound, it had a sharp, metallic edge, a deliberate impact. My gut, a traitorous organ that had once served me well, gave a familiar, unpleasant lurch. It was a sensation I hadn't felt in a long time, a prickle of something that felt an awful lot like interest. I pulled on my jacket, the rough wool of familiar comfort. The cold seeped through the thin material as I stepped out onto the street, the neon glow of a distant bar painting garish stripes across the wet pavement. The air bit at my exposed skin, sharp and unforgiving. I walked, my footsteps echoing in the narrow alleys, each one a small, solitary drumbeat against the night. My destination was the waterfront, a place where shadows stretched and secrets festered. The warehouse district, loading dock, camera blind spot. The words echoed in my mind, a grim mantra. It was a place I knew too well, a place where the city's underbelly pulsed with a life all its own. The kind of life I'd once been a part of, then a hunter of, and now I wasn't sure what I was, just a man adrift. The scent of brine grew stronger, mingling with the acrid tang of diesel. I found it easily enough, a gap between two monolithic structures leading to the edge of the water. The loading dock was a vast, empty expanse, slick with a recent rain. This was the spot, the place the report had mentioned. The camera blind spot. A perfect stage for a carefully orchestrated act. A knot tightened in my chest. The details, as sparse as they were, snagged on my memory like burrs. The precision, the quiet efficiency. The style, it was too much. I moved closer, my senses on high alert. The scattered debris, a broken crate, a coil of frayed rope, a scattering of wood shavings told a story. A story of swift, brutal action. No signs of struggle, no alarms tripped, just emptiness, an absence where something vital should have been. Then I saw it. A faint, metallic glint near the edge of the dock. I crouched, my knees protesting, and picked it up. It was a small, intricately carved silver cufflink. Not the kind of trinket I'd find lying around. This was bespoke. My breath hitched. I'd seen this design before, etched into the periphery of my nightmares. The way the craftsman had interwoven the delicate tendrils of a vine, the subtle curve of a single, tiny leaf. It was a signature. A mark I'd spent countless sleepless nights trying to decipher. This wasn't a random act. This was a message. A taunt like a ghost. And he left something. A little silver thing. My hands trembled as I turned the cufflink over. The cold metal seemed to burn against my skin. This wasn't just a heisting crew. This was him. The one who had slipped through my fingers, the one who had left a trail of broken lives and unanswered questions. He was back, and he was making sure I knew it. A wave of nausea washed over me. The disillusionment that had settled over me like a shroud began to fray at the edges, replaced by a raw, gnawing anger. The years of drowning my failures in cheap whiskey and self-pity felt like a betrayal, not just of myself, but of the people who had suffered. The emptiness of the loading dock seemed to press in on me. The silence was no longer expectant, it was accusatory. This was more than just a crime. This was a resurrection. And I, Cole, the disgraced former detective, was being dragged back into the light whether I wanted to be or not. The shadow of the past had found its voice, and it was speaking my name. The weight of that cufflink, a tiny, ornate anchor of a forgotten past, settled in my pocket. The chill of the metal had leached into my skin, a phantom echo of the cold dread that had gripped me back then. He was back. The ghost I'd chased through the city's shadowed arteries, the architect of a chaos I thought I'd buried. And he'd left me a breadcrumb, a taunt. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of quiet neglect, felt suffocating. The dust motes dancing in the weak afternoon sun seemed to mock my stillness. I needed air. I needed to move. The warehouse district, loading dock, camera blind spot, that was where it had all begun. It was a place etched into my memory, a scar I couldn't unsee. I drove, the familiar rumble of the engine a low thrum against the rising tide of unease. The city blurred past, a canvas of indifferent brick and steel. Each street corner held a potential memory, a ghost of a past investigation, a reminder of my fall. The cufflink in my pocket felt heavier with every mile. It was a deliberate message, a gauntlet thrown down. He knew I was still here, still breathing, still wrestling with the specter of my failure. The words tasted like rust and regret. I preferred to walk, to feel the gritty pavement beneath my worn soles, to let the atmosphere seep into me. The air here was thick with the smell of brine and decaying cardboard, a symphony of neglect. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp and lonely. I approached the loading dock, the vast expanse of corrugated metal doors looming like slumbering giants. The specific spot, the camera blind spot, was burned into my mind. It was a testament to his meticulous planning, his intimate knowledge of the urban landscape. He hadn't just been a killer, he'd been an artist of the unseen. My own eyes scanned the area, not with the detached professionalism of a detective, but with the sharp, desperate focus of a man hunting his own undoing. The meticulous precision of the heists, the unnerving lack of forced entry, the ghost-like disappearances of valuable cargo. It had all pointed to a single elusive mind. And now the same signature. I walked the perimeter of the dock, my gaze tracing the weathered concrete. The paint on the metal doors was peeling, revealing patches of rust like old wounds. Graffiti, vibrant and crude, adorned some of the walls, a testament to the district's transient life. I knelt, my fingers brushing against a faint scuff mark on the ground, barely visible. It was too fresh, too distinct to be the work of a casual passerby. It spoke of something being dragged, or perhaps a hurried departure. My mind raced, replaying the details of the original investigations. The broken window pane at the first scene, supposedly forced entry, but the glass had been shattered from the inside. The missing security footage, not erased, but somehow never recorded. Small inconsistencies, easily dismissed by others, but they had gnawed at me. They were the threads I'd tried to pull, only to find them vanishing into thin air. I stood and walked towards the edge of the dock, the murky water of the canal lapping against the pilings below. A discarded fishing net lay tangled on the concrete, a lonely monument to forgotten efforts. Then I saw it, tucked beneath a loose plank of wood, glinting dully in the fading light. A tiny shard of glass, not ordinary glass. This was tinted with a faint, almost imperceptible greenish hue. I'd seen glass like this before in the specialized eyewear worn by certain industrial workers, or in the lenses of a high-powered scope. This wasn't random. He was not just back. He was escalating, and he was inviting me to play his twisted game. The old instincts, dormant for so long, began to stir, a dangerous, unwelcome warmth spreading through my veins. Against my better judgment, against every rational thought screaming at me to walk away, I knew I couldn't. The city had a debt to pay, and so did I. The wind, a ragged breath from the harbor, whipped grit against my face as I navigated the labyrinthine alleys of the warehouse district. Loading dock, camera blind spot. The air hung thick with the brine and decay of forgotten cargo, a smell that clung to me like a second skin. It had been 3 days since the jewelers, 3 days of restless nights and a gnawing certainty that the past wasn't just knocking, it was kicking down the door. The news reports, carefully curated and blandly delivered, spoke of a daring daylight robbery. A syndicate, they called it, professional, clean. But I knew the signature, the elegant brutality of the execution. It was him, the same chilling precision that had haunted my dreams for a decade. My contact, a twitchy bird of a man who dealt in whispers and stolen data, had given me a tip. A meet, tonight, here in the belly of this forgotten industrial beast. He'd said the syndicate was moving something big, something that would make the jeweler's heist look like petty shoplifting. The loading dock was a skeletal expanse of rusting metal and splintered wood, a stage set for a drama I was already too deeply involved in. The camera blind spot my contact had emphasized, the perfect place for a transaction that preferred to remain unseen. A low rumble, distinct from the usual groans of the aging structures, drew my attention. A sleek black van, its windows tinted to an impenetrable obsidian, idled near the edge of the dock. It was a stark contrast to the grimy surroundings, an unwelcome stain on the decay. My gut tightened. This was it. I ducked behind a stack of rotting crates, the musty scent of damp wood filling my nostrils. My hand instinctively went to the worn grip of the pistol tucked beneath my jacket. It was a foolish habit, one I'd tried to shed, but old instincts died hard. Especially when they felt like the only thing keeping me alive. A figure emerged from the van, silhouetted against the weak light. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with an economy of motion that spoke of disciplined training. They carried heavy, canvas-wrapped bundles, their movements sure and practiced. Then a voice, not loud, but carrying with an unnerving clarity. "Everything in order." The reply was a low murmur lost to the wind. I strained to see, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. One of the figures, the one who seemed to be in charge, reached into his jacket. He pulled out a small, metallic object. It glinted, even in this meager light. My breath hitched. It was a cufflink. The same ornate anchor-shaped cufflink I'd found clutched in the hand of the last victim years ago. The ghost's calling card. This wasn't just a syndicate, this was him. He was back and he was orchestrating these heists, using the syndicate as his puppets, his pawns. The implications slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just repeating the past, he was escalating it. The jewelers was a test, a warm-up. These bundles, whatever they contained, were the real prize. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments. The meticulous planning, the avoidance of witnesses, the choice of this isolated, forgotten corner of the city. He was a phantom, a master of disappearing, and this was his stage. My heart leaped into my throat. A patrol car, its headlights, blindingly bright, caught the figures by the van. Shouts erupted, sharp and panicked. The figures by the van scattered, dropping their bundles. The tall one, the one with the cufflink, turned, his gaze sweeping the area. For a terrifying second, I thought he saw me. His head tilted, a predator sensing prey. But then the patrol car was closer, its siren wailing, a raw, tearing sound that shattered the night. The black van screeched its tires, accelerating away with a speed that defied the rough terrain. The patrol car idled, its lights bathing the empty loading dock in an eerie glow. Two officers emerged, guns drawn, their voices tense as they surveyed the scattered bundles. One of them shone his flashlight on the ground, then stooped. He picked something up. He was holding a cufflink, the same anchor. The officers were talking into their radios, their voices urgent. I knew what was coming. The official channels would be alerted. The old case files would be exhumed. They would connect me to this, whether I wanted them to or not. The stakes had risen, not just for the city, but for me. This time, there would be no running. The wind, a thief of sound, tugged at the frayed edges of my coat. The figure in charge, silhouetted against the bruised twilight, held the glinting object aloft. A cufflink, not just any cufflink. The unmistakable crest of the Sterling family embossed on polished obsidian. My gut clenched. Sterling. The name was a ghost, a phantom limb I'd tried to amputate from my memory. I'd seen it before, years ago, on a crumpled piece of parchment clutched in the cold, dead hand of a victim. A signature, a taunt, but that was the work of him. The man I'd chased into the abyss and lost. This was different. This was a performance. My gaze snagged on a discarded cigarette butt near my feet. I knelt, the rough concrete biting into my knees through worn denim. A slim, unfiltered brand, not the usual fare for the lowlifes who frequented this forgotten corner of the city. This was a detail that pricked at the edges of my awareness, a discordant note in the symphony of urban decay. Coffee, black and bitter, did even less. I spread the files across my desk, a landscape of shattered lives and unanswered questions, the recent heists. The jewelry exchange, the rare coin collector, the antiquities dealer, each a precision operation executed with an unnerving lack of collateral damage. And now the Sterling crest. It felt like a breadcrumb, deliberately placed, but leading where? I traced the names of the victims with a calloused finger. A name synonymous with old money, with power that flowed through the city's veins like a silent, unseen current. But what connected them to the other targets? The coin collector, a reclusive academic. The antiquities dealer, a woman known for her sharp tongue and even sharper eye for forgeries. No obvious ties. No shared business ventures. Then it hit me. I pulled out the file from that case. The one that had fractured my career, that had left me adrift in a sea of regret. The victims. The names blurred, then sharpened, coalescing into a horrifying tableau. They weren't random, not then and not now. He hadn't picked his victims at random. He'd chosen them for a reason. And the Sterling crest. It was in that file too. A small, almost insignificant detail I dismissed as a coincidence. A spurious clue in a labyrinth of misdirection. My hands trembled as I reached for the phone. I needed access to city records, not the public ones, the ones buried deep, the ones that required persuasion. Hours bled into each other. The hum of the ancient computer was a monotonous drone, a counterpoint to the frantic rhythm of my own thoughts. The data began to emerge, a mosaic of hidden connections. The coin collector had, years ago, authenticated a significant portion of the Sterling family's private collection. A collection rumored to contain artifacts of questionable provenance. The antiquities dealer? She'd been instrumental in acquiring several pieces for the Sterling estate, pieces that had vanished from public record shortly after their acquisition. A pattern, a motive, not greed, something far more insidious. This wasn't about money. It was about reclaiming something, or perhaps burying something. My eyes fell on a photograph tucked away in the Sterling file. A younger Sterling, his face unlined, a smug smile playing on his lips. Beside him, a woman. Her features were indistinct, lost in the grainy quality of the print, but there was something familiar about her posture, the way she held her head. A flicker of recognition, so fleeting I almost missed it. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the glossy surface. Who was she? She wasn't a public figure. No social media footprint. It was as if she'd been scrubbed from existence. The phone rang, jolting me from my reverie. Got something for you, Cole, about those sterling dealings. Seems there was a private acquisition, very hush-hush. A collection of historical documents, very sensitive. Disappeared around the same time as your old friend's spree. Historical documents, sensitive, disappeared. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. This wasn't a copycat. This was him or someone who knew him. And they were using the sterling name, the sterling wealth, to cover their tracks, the cufflink. It wasn't just a signature, it was a message, a challenge. And the targets, the Sterling family's curated collection of secrets, were just the beginning. The tension in the air thickened, a palpable weight pressing down on me. The ghost from my past had returned, not as a memory, but as a living, breathing threat. And this time, I wouldn't let him slip through my fingers. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. The rain, a relentless curtain of gray, slicked the asphalt of the warehouse district, turning the loading dock into a treacherous mirror. Each drop that splattered on my worn trench coat felt like a tiny accusation. The air hung thick with the brine of the nearby river and the metallic tang of damp steel. This was the place. The intel had been sparse, a whisper from a frightened informant, but it led me here to this desolate stretch of concrete, to this notorious camera-blind spot. My breath plumed, a ghost in the downpour. Years had passed since I'd last stalked these shadows, hunting a phantom. Now the phantom felt closer than ever, its tendrils reaching out from the past, ensnaring me again. The documents, the Sterling documents, had been the key. The same methodical hand that had orchestrated the Sterling murders, a case that had broken me. He moved with a deliberate slowness, each step a calculated impact on the wet ground. Not the killer, not directly, but someone who knew him, someone who knew the Sterling name, the Sterling secrets. Cole. The voice was a low rumble like stones grinding together. He was a known fence, a collector of ill-gotten gains, someone who operated in the periphery of the criminal world. He'd been questioned years ago about the Sterling affair. His answers had been as evasive as smoke. "You know why I'm here," I said, my voice rough, fighting the damp air. My hand, unseen, rested on the familiar weight of the pistol tucked beneath my coat. He offered a slow, humorless smile. "Always looking for trouble, aren't you, Cole? Some habits die hard." He gestured vaguely towards the river where the skeletal silhouettes of cranes clawed at the bruised sky. "This is a quiet place, good for business, bad for visitors." "The Sterling documents," I pressed, ignoring his deflection. "Where are they?" He took a step closer, the rain plastering his shirt to his chest. I could smell cheap whiskey and something else, a faint, cloying sweetness like overripe fruit. "You think I'd be holding onto something like that? That's not my style. I'm a facilitator, Cole, a connector." He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "You're barking up the wrong doc, detective or former detective. But if you want to know who's been asking about old Sterling business, and who's been paying handsomely for specific information, you might want to look at those who benefited most from his, a sensation I'd fought so hard to bury. Benefited most? That pointed to. No, it couldn't be. The Sterling family had been devastated, or had they? I'd been so focused on the killer, on the gruesome tableau he'd left behind, that I'd perhaps overlooked the more mundane, yet equally potent motive of greed. "Who are you talking about?" My voice was a tight wire. He shrugged, a massive ripple of muscle under his damp clothes. "Names, they're expensive, Cole, and information like that. It comes with a price I'm not willing to pay for you." Just as the words left his mouth, a sharp crack echoed through the rain-soaked air. Not a gunshot, something else, metal on metal. My head snapped towards the sound. They held a length of pipe, its end glinting wetly. And as they moved into the faint light cast by a distant, flickering bulb, I saw it. The glint of something metallic on their wrist. A bracelet. A delicate silver chain, the kind I'd seen before. The fence's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine alarm replacing his practiced nonchalance. "Oh, hell," he muttered, taking a step back. The figure with the pipe didn't hesitate. They swung, not at me, but at the fence. The pipe connected with a sickening thud against his shoulder, sending him staggering back with a grunt of pain. Before I could react, before I could draw my weapon, the figure turned towards me. Their face was obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, but the posture, the way they held the pipe. It was a posture of brutal efficiency. And then a voice, clear and surprisingly melodic, cut through the din of the rain. "You're not supposed to be here, Cole." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact delivered with an unnerving calm. And in that moment, a horrifying realization began to dawn. The meticulous planning, the intimate knowledge of the Sterling case, The carefully orchestrated heists, it wasn't just a copycat, it wasn't just someone connected to the killer. It was someone inside, someone who had access, someone who had been there. The figure lunged. The pipe whistled through the air. I ducked, the metal grazing my ear, sending a jolt of pure adrenaline through me. I was alone, facing an opponent I didn't understand who moved with a grace that belied the brutal weapon in their hands. This was no mere associate. This was a predator, and I had walked right into its trap. My own investigation had led me directly into the path of the very danger I was trying to escape. The setback was absolute. The mystery deepened, twisting into something far more personal, far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. The stench of brine and decaying fish, a familiar perfume from my former life, clung to the damp air. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom of the warehouse district, loading dock, camera blind spot, painting shifting canvases of rust-streaked corrugated metal and discarded pallets. Each shadow seemed to writhe, morphing into the phantom shapes that haunted my waking hours. The detective had been right. This wasn't a copycat. The precision, the audacity, the chilling echo of the Sterling case, it was too much to be coincidence. My gut twisted. Now that silence was being amplified, a crescendo of violence building in the city's underbelly. The string of heists, each one cleaner than the last, each one leaving the authorities baffled, felt like a personal affront. They were a taunt, a perverse echo of the killer I'd let slip through my fingers. I crouched beside a stack of waterlogged crates, the wood groaning under my weight. The detective had called me, his voice tight with an urgency that mirrored my own. He'd found something, a thread that connected the recent crimes to the Sterling perpetrator. Not a confession, not a witness, but something more subtle. A signature, perhaps, hidden in plain sight. He's not just taking the money, Cole, the detective had said, his words a low rumble over the phone. He's taking trophies or something like them. Trophies. The Sterling killer hadn't left physical mementos. His mark was the absence, the meticulously erased presence of his victims. But these heists, they were different. They were audacious acts of acquisition, not just of wealth, but of specific items. The antique ledger from the bank, the rare first edition from the gallery, the intricate clockwork mechanism from the museum's restoration lab. Each item on its own seemed insignificant, but together they painted a disturbing mosaic. My flashlight beam swept across a discarded manifest, its ink blurred by moisture. I picked it up, the paper brittle in my gloved hands. Shipping details, cargo manifests, dates. My eyes scanned the faded print, searching for pattern, a connection. Nothing, just the mundane detritus of commerce. Then a glint caught my eye, a small, almost imperceptible smudge of what looked like dried paint, a deep, almost iridescent blue on the corner of the manifest. I leaned closer, my breath catching. It was the same shade of blue that had been found on the doorknob of the Sterling victim's apartment. A detail so minute, so easily overlooked that it had been dismissed by the original investigators as an anomaly, but I remembered. I remembered everything about that case. My mind raced, piecing together fragments of memory. The blue paint, the specific items stolen. It wasn't about the monetary value. It was about something else, something symbolic. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling slightly as I navigated through my contacts. I found the detective's number and dialed. "I'm at the warehouse district, loading dock, camera blind spot," I said, my voice rough. "That blue paint, it matches, and the items, they're not random." A pause, then the detective's voice laced with a sudden realization. "What are you saying, Cole?" "He's recreating something," I breathed, the words tumbling out. "He's not just stealing. He's collecting pieces, pieces of a puzzle, or maybe pieces of a life." The implications were enormous. The Sterling killer hadn't just been a killer, he'd been an artist of sorts, his canvas the lives he extinguished. And now he was back, his macabre masterpiece not yet complete. I scanned the surrounding area, my senses on high alert. The camera blind spot, a place where surveillance failed, was the perfect staging ground for a predator. My gaze fell upon a discarded toolkit, half hidden beneath a tarp. Among the assortment of tools, a small, intricately carved wooden bird lay nestled. It was delicate, almost lifelike, its wings poised for flight. I recognized the craftsmanship. It was identical to the small wooden figures the Sterling killer had left behind, not at the crime scenes, but near them, small, silent witnesses to his work. The detective's voice crackled through the phone. "Cole, what have you found?" I stared at the wooden bird, its tiny form a stark contrast to the brutality it represented. "He's not just a killer, detective," I said, my voice a low growl. "He's a collector, and he's building something." The air grew heavy, thick with the unspoken. I was no longer just investigating a series of heists. The past was no longer a ghost. It was a living, breathing entity, and it was reaching out to claim me. And the true nature of the threat, the depth of his obsession, was far more terrifying than I had ever imagined. The chill of the dock air, usually a bracing tonic, felt like a shroud. I'd spent too long in the shadows of this warehouse district, the scent of brine and decay a constant companion. Tonight, the silence was a coiled viper. The previous night's encounter, a phantom in the periphery, had left an unease that gnawed at my gut. It wasn't just the precision of the heists anymore. It was the signature, a macabre echo that vibrated through my bones, a song only I seemed to hear. I circled the perimeter of the warehouse district, loading dock, camera, blind spot. The moonlight, a sliver of bone against the bruised sky, did little to illuminate the deeper recesses. My flashlight beam, a nervous tremor in my hand, danced over stacks of crates, their stenciled markings faded and illegible. My phone buzzed, a jarring intrusion. The screen glowed with a familiar number. My former colleague. I hesitated. We hadn't spoken since. Well, since everything, since the case that broke me, but duty or perhaps a desperate need for any semblance of connection to the life I'd lost compelled me to answer. "Cole, is that I?" The voice was rough, strained. "It's me," I replied, my voice a gravelly rasp. I heard about the warehouse, the one with the missing jewels. The intel suggested a connection to him. A pause, heavy with unspoken history. The police are calling it a coincidence, a string of lucky breaks for a seasoned thief, but I know I wouldn't be sniffing around here without a reason. "They're not just heists," I said, my gaze sweeping across the deserted expanse. "They are rehearsals." "Rehearsals for what, Cole?" The question was laced with apprehension. "For something bigger, something that hits closer to home." I didn't elaborate. He wouldn't understand, not yet. "Cole, the commissioner wants I out of this. He thinks I read too close too. Compromised." "Compromised?" The word tasted like ash. "He's compromised if he thinks this is just about stolen goods." I lowered my voice. "The methods, the timing, it's him, it has to be." "But why now, after all these years?" My former colleague was right. The stakes had never been higher, and the perpetrator was clearly aware of my involvement, my past. He was playing a game, and I was his unwilling pawn. The stench of rotting fish from a nearby processing plant mingled with the metallic tang of something I couldn't quite place. I found myself drawn to a specific loading dock, a known camera blind spot. The perfect place for a clandestine meeting or a swift, silent departure. Then I saw it, a glint of metal half buried in the loose gravel near a rusted shipping container. I knelt, my gloved fingers brushing away the debris. It was a cufflink, intricate, silver with a small, distinctive engraving. A stylized falcon, not from fear but from a sudden, sickening recognition. This wasn't just a signature, it was a message. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing a frantic rhythm against my ribs, the cufflink. I knew that cufflink. I'd seen it before, years ago, in a dimly lit interrogation room nestled against the crisp white shirt of a man I'd failed to convict. A man who had slipped through my fingers like smoke. The perpetrator wasn't just mirroring the killer's methods. He was taunting me. He was letting me know he remembered, and he was using something or someone precious to me as bait. My mind raced, piecing together fragmented memories, discarded theories. The missing jewels, the meticulously planned logistics, they were all distractions. The true target wasn't material. It was personal. It was me. I pulled out my phone again, my fingers fumbling as I scrolled through my contacts. I needed to reach someone, anyone who could understand the gravity of this shift. But who? The police wouldn't listen. My former colleagues were bound by protocol. A low hum, barely perceptible, vibrated through the concrete beneath my feet. It was coming from inside the nearest warehouse. The sound was growing, a mechanical thrumming that spoke of hidden machinery, of a secret operation. My eyes darted to the large, rusted door of the warehouse. It was sealed tight. No visible entry points, but the hum. It was undeniable, and with it, a faint, acrid odor like ozone and burnt sugar. This was it. The next stage of his game, and he had found a way to make me the center of his twisted narrative. The stakes weren't just raised, they had become a precipice, and I was teetering on the edge. The city exhaled a damp, metallic breath as I navigated the labyrinthine alleys of the warehouse district, loading dock, camera, blind spot. Each shadow clung to me, a familiar, unwelcome shroud. The air tasted of brine and decay, a perfume I'd grown too accustomed to. My former colleague's voice, a distant echo in my mind, had been laced with a weary urgency. "He knows, Cole, he's baiting I." And he was right. This wasn't just a string of robberies, it was a twisted performance, a macabre echo of the past, and I was the lead actor in his grim play. My fingers traced the rough brickwork of a derelict storage unit, the chill seeping through my worn leather gloves. The perpetrator, this ghost in the machine, was meticulous. Every detail of the heists, from the precise timing to the almost theatrical selection of targets, screamed familiarity. It was the signature of a phantom I'd chased for years, a killer whose methods had always eluded my grasp, leaving only a trail of shattered lives and unanswered questions. Now, he had resurfaced not as a killer but as a thief, a phantom architect of chaos, and he was using my failure as his blueprint, a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. I froze, every nerve ending screaming. I exhaled, the tension in my shoulders easing a fraction. It was the kind of quiet that amplified every rustle, every creak, making the ordinary sound like a harbinger of danger. He liked the challenge, the intellectual puzzle. He reveled in the chase, in the knowledge that he was always one step ahead. And he knew I was watching, that was the key. He wanted me to watch, this was my chance, not to catch him, not yet, but to lure him, to make him reveal himself. I needed to be the bait, the irresistible lure. I thought of the abandoned shipyard on the north end, a place of forgotten industry and rusting giants. It was a ghost of a place, much like the killer himself. And it had a cavernous, echoing warehouse, a place where secrets could be buried and unearthed with equal ease. A few keystrokes, a message sent into the digital ether, a carefully crafted lie designed to ignite his ego, to pique his interest. I didn't mention the heists directly or the past. Instead, I alluded to a recent, significant acquisition of valuable artifacts, something that would appeal to his discerning taste for the rare and the illicit. I hinted at its location, a vague description that would force him to investigate, to confirm, to make a move. The waiting began. It was a familiar, agonizing ritual. Hours bled into each other, marked by the slow crawl of the moon across the bruised sky. I moved through the derelict structures, my footsteps muffled by layers of dust and forgotten debris. Each rustle of wind-blown paper, each distant clang of metal sent a jolt through me. They was that him. They was he already here, a phantom observer, toying with me before I even knew I was caught. I found a vantage point overlooking the main access road to the shipyard, a rusted catwalk suspended precariously above the gloom. From here I could see the entrance, the skeletal remains of cranes, the hulking silhouettes of dormant vessels. My thoughts drifted, as they often did, to the faces I couldn't save, the one case that had defined my downfall. Was I strong enough to face this phantom again? Doubt, a venomous serpent, coiled in my gut. I had to push it back. This wasn't about redemption, not entirely. He was playing with fire, and I was determined to be the one to douse the flames, even if it meant getting burned. Then a faint sound, not the wind, not the water, a low mechanical hum growing steadily louder. A single vehicle. It wasn't the brute force of a typical criminal enterprise. This was precision. This was his style. My breath hitched. He was here. The trap was sprung, and the hunter had become the hunted. The game was far from over. It was just beginning. The salt-laced wind whipped tendrils of my hair across my eyes, a stinging reminder of the city's indifference. I moved through the warehouse district, loading dock, camera, blind spot, a ghost in the machine of their illicit operations. The air, thick with the tang of rust and something acridly chemical, pressed in. Each creak of metal, each distant clang was a drumbeat against my ribs. They were here. I knew it. The meticulous planning, the chilling echo of the past, it all led to this forgotten corner of the city. My boots scuffed against loose gravel. A flicker of movement just beyond the reach of the single, sputtering security light drew my gaze. It wasn't a rat scurrying for cover, nor a stray cat hunting. It was too deliberate, too fluid. My hand tightened around the worn grip of the firearm tucked inside my coat. Years of rust had settled on my skills, but the instinct, the primal awareness remained. I edged closer, hugging the corrugated iron wall of a derelict storage unit. The smell intensified that same sickly sweet scent that had permeated the crime scenes, the one I'd tried to scrub from my memory, from my very soul. It was here. The phantom, the architect of my downfall, was finally within reach. A low hum vibrated through the concrete beneath my feet, a sound that spoke of power, of something contained. I peered around the edge of the unit. The loading dock was a cavernous maw, sparsely lit by the same weak bulb that cast long, dancing shadows. And there, bathed in the sickly yellow glow, was the figure. Tall, cloaked in anonymity, they were meticulously arranging something on a makeshift workbench. The glint of metal, the precise movements, sent a shiver down my spine. It was a dance I knew too well, a choreography of destruction. "I rep playing with fire," I said, my voice rough, unused to the open air. It felt alien, a stranger's rasp. The figure froze. Slowly, deliberately, they turned. The face was obscured by the deep hood of their garment, but I could feel their gaze, a physical weight on my skin. No words, just that unnerving stillness. "I know who I am," I pressed, taking a hesitant step forward. "I know what I did, and I am still chasing ghosts. The voice, not the phantom's voice from my nightmares, but something. else something closer. Ghosts don't leave this kind of signature, I retorted, my eyes scanning the immediate area. Cans, tubes, wires, the tools of a gruesome trade. This is real, people are going to get hurt. The figure took a step back, melting further into the gloom. Hurt is subjective, isn't it? Some find it. This was it. The moment I'd replayed 1,000 times in the quiet hours, the moment I'd dreamt of, planned for. I think this is a game, I demanded, raising my firearm, the metal cool against my palm. I think I'll let I get away with it again. Again. The distorted voice held a hint of amusement. I never had me, detective. I never even understood. A sudden lurch in my gut. What did that mean? I'd pieced together enough. It all pointed to one mind, one twisted genius. The figure gestured vaguely towards the workbench. Look closer. What do I see? I squinted, my eyes straining in the dim light. The arrangement was complex, intricate, small metallic components gleaming dully. Wires snaked between them, connecting to a central device. It wasn't just a bomb, not in the conventional sense. It was something far more insidious. Then I saw it. Nestled amongst the components, almost hidden, was a small, tarnished silver locket. My breath hitched. I knew that locket. It belonged to... A sharp crack echoed through the cavernous space, not from my firearm, but from somewhere to my left. I flinched, instinctively ducking, my focus momentarily broken. When I looked back, the figure was gone, vanished as if they were never there. Where had they gone, and that sound? I scrambled towards the workbench, my heart racing a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The locket. It was undeniable. It was the same one, but how? And the voice. It had been so close. Then another sound, a soft, rhythmic dripping. I followed it, my senses on high alert. And there, partially concealed by a stack of rotting crates, was another figure. This one was slumped against the wall, their head lolling at an unnatural angle. This wasn't the phantom. This was someone I knew, someone I'd worked with. My mind reeled, the voice, the staged scene. It was a deliberate misdirection, a cruel, elaborate trap. The real perpetrator wasn't the phantom I'd been hunting. They were someone else entirely, someone who knew me, who knew my past, who was using my own demons against me. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, leaving me breathless and disoriented. I had been so focused on the ghost of the past, I'd missed the very real danger standing right in front of me. The metallic tang of old oil and something acrid like burnt sugar clung to the air in the warehouse district, loading dock, camera blind spot. My own breath, ragged and hot, misted the dim light filtering through the grimy skylights. The dripping sound, a maddening metronome, had led me here to a place where shadows clung like damp wool. It was the sound of a ruptured pipe, a slow bleed into the concrete floor, pooling into an oily rainbow, but my focus wasn't on the leak. It was on the figure slumped against a stack of crates, the glint of metal in their hand. The locket. It lay open on the damp concrete beside them, a tiny, tarnished heart reflecting the weak light. It was identical to the one I'd found at the first scene, and the second, and the third. The same intricate filigree, the same faint scratch near the clasp. The voice, the one that had echoed in my mind, the one that had taunted me from the periphery of my shattered memories, had been hers. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. The figure stirred, a faint groan escaping their lips. I moved closer, my steps measured, each one a deliberate act of will. My hand hovered over the sidearm I no longer carried. This wasn't about guns. This was about endings. It was the accomplice, the one who had been pulling the strings, the one who had been feeding information, the one who had been there. But it wasn't the mastermind, not the ghost I'd been chasing. "You shouldn't be here," the accomplice rasped, their voice thick with pain and something else. Defeat. They fumbled with the locket, their fingers clumsy. "He said you wouldn't find us." "He..." The word was a whisper barely audible above the ceaseless drip. My mind raced, sifting through fragments, piecing together a mosaic of betrayal. The meticulously planned heists, the uncanny mimicry of the Ripper's MO, the locket. It wasn't just a trophy, it was a signature, a twisted breadcrumb trail. He always planned for everything, the accomplice continued, their gaze fixed on the locket. Except this. He didn't plan for me to be left behind. A bitter laugh, choked and wet, escaped them. "He used me, you've known him all along, he was always closer than you thought." A knot tightened in my gut. This was it, the final piece, the one that had eluded me for so long. I looked at the locket, at the familiar filigree, and then at the accomplice's trembling hand. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, surfaced. A brief, almost forgotten conversation in a dimly lit office. A shared frustration over the Ripper case, a hand on my shoulder offering. What? Sympathy? Misdirection? "The locket," I murmured, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening finality. It wasn't the Ripper's signature, it was hers. He was leaving them to you. The accomplice flinched. He was trying to tell you, trying to warn you, but he twisted everything, made it look like his work. A single tear traced a path through the grime on their cheek. He wanted you to think he was still out there. The phantom that had haunted my nightmares, that had consumed my life, was a construct, their breath hitching. He made me believe we were partners, that we were righting wrongs. They gestured vaguely with the locket. These were meant to be messages for I, but he intercepted them, changed them. My gaze swept across the warehouse district, loading dock, camera blind spot, because the real victory wasn't in the heists. It was in the fear, in the chaos. He is the one who always said we were on the same side. The truth, when it finally arrived, was not a thunderclap, a slow, insidious seep. The Ripper wasn't a phantom from my past. He was someone I'd trusted, someone I'd confided in, someone who had used my grief, my obsession, as a weapon. I stood, the weariness of 1,000 nights settling into my bones. The accomplice remained slumped against the crates, the locket a tiny, silent testament to a twisted love and a brutal betrayal. The dripping continued, a mournful dirge for a case finally closed, for a ghost finally laid to rest. The real monster was not the phantom I'd hunted, but the viper I'd allowed into my inner circle. And in that moment, in the grimy stillness of the warehouse district, loading dock, camera blind spot, I understood the true cost of my obsession. It wasn't just the lives lost, but the trust broken, the innocence shattered, the very foundation of my world built on a lie.